Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar, which is Demystifying EV Technology and the Transition to Electrifying Your Fleet. This is the latest in the Demystifying events hosted by us here at the Green Economy, and these events and webinars are designed to help demystify the various green technologies and services and perform a range of support that we offer here at the Green Economy. So the session plan is, first of all, we'll have introductions to our speakers. Then we'll move into the panel discussion. There's a live Q&A towards the end, and then there'll be some closing remarks from myself, and then signposting to some additional information that you may find beneficial. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be publicly made available via the Green Economy website and our YouTube channel. There'll be also additional write-ups and guides that will support this webinar. If you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function at the top of the screen, and my colleague Tim will come on at the end and pose those questions to the panelists. So what's the latest from the EV sector? So transport accounted for 34% of the UK's carbon emissions in 2022, with the majority of these emissions coming from road transportation. EVs generate less tailpipe emissions than their petrol counterparts, contributing to better air quality within city centres, and can help boost your green credentials of your organisation. Increasing customer demand and greater availability of electric models and the number of electric cars in the UK is growing at a rapid rate. Last month, it was reported that there was over 850,000 fully electric cars in the UK and a further 530,000 plug-in hybrids. In August of this year as well, there was over 48,000 public EV charging points across the UK, and that's an increase of 42% compared to data from last August. These figures also don't include home and workplace charging, so that would account for around 400,000 charges in total. So today's panelists, we've got a great range of speakers who I'll ask to provide some introductions. So first of all, Jill, would you like to introduce yourself and provide an overview of your organisation?
Thanks very much, Ashley. I'm really delighted to be here. So I'm Jill Noel. I'm head of EV communications for Electrics, which is essentially where a one-stop shop. So you can come to us for your electric car lease, your home charger and your insurance. We're part of LV General Insurance and indeed Allianz. I've been working in electric vehicles for around about 10 years now. Doing many years work on EV grid integration projects. In lockdown, I co-founded Electric Vehicle Association England, but essentially I do whatever I can, whether I'm in work or outside of work, to advocate for the uptake of electric vehicles and really kind of help people overcome any concerns they might have about making the switch.
Brilliant, thank you. And then secondly, Dave.
Hi, thank you once again for inviting me. I'm Dave Lavery. I'm the Business Relationship Manager at the EVC Group, and we are electrical vehicle charge point installation company, national, but we are based in the Northwest, but we do have coverage across the UK. We look at installing charge points at residential properties, for businesses, and also for local councils. So whatever your charge point needs are, we will come out, do a site survey, review what is required, and then work with you, the DNO and the civils, if needed, to install a charge point at your chosen location.
Super, thank you. And Chris?
Thank you, Ashley. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Bingham, Chairman of Green Arc. So we are a business that looks to transition customers from setting fire to hydrocarbons and help them on their journey to clean energy. So we supply, we're also an EV leasing business. We do charge point installs. We will do also solar and batteries and heat pumps and anything else required to get our customers across from largely oil, which is our background in terms of an energy company, over to clean energy.
Super. And I'm not sure if Paul has joined us yet. So if he hasn't, then I will move into the discussion. So first of all, we're going to look at scene setting and the initial customer journey. So when we take into account the initial feasibility considerations, what should a business and an EV, oh yeah, Paul's Paul there. Paul? No, don't think we got Paul yet. Okay, we'll just carry on then. So yeah, so sorry. So the initial feasibility considerations a business should take into account. So Jill, come to you first. Those initial considerations.
Yeah, I think it's really important as a business to understand what both your needs as a business are, and also the needs of your employees as well, or the the kind of the desires of your employees. So if we you may be a business that that runs company cars, could you look to switch those to electric? Thanks to really low rates of benefit in kind at the moment, just 2% until 2025, then increasing by 1% up to 2028. That means that electric vehicle business leasing are really attractive. And you could also, for example, if you're VAT registered, you can claim 50% of the VAT back on the lease and 100% VAT back on the cost of maintenance. So that's one aspect to consider as a business, I think. The other aspect for me is to look at an EV salary sacrifice scheme. 60% of all businesses actually across the UK implement some form of salary sacrifice scheme, and an electric vehicle salary sacrifice is really no different. And again, it's those low tax rates that make it a really affordable way for employees to access electric cars. And then in terms of the, as a business, you are then supporting your sustainability goals. Arguably you are enhancing your reputation amongst not only your employees, but your stakeholders as well. And implementing EV salary sacrifice schemes has been proven actually to help both retain and attract talent, great employees. So it's a really important way of doing that, as well as, of course, improving local air quality, because electric vehicles are zero tailpipe emission. So it's kind of it's a win-win.
Super, thanks for that, Jill. And Chris, is there anything that you would like to add on the back of Jill's comment?
Well, as you might imagine, I agree completely with Jill. All her numbers are very accurate. The only additional benefit I would suggest would be, from a company's point of view, there's also no national insurance contribution from their point of view. So what we're finding is that it's particularly attractive to people who are on higher rates of income tax, particularly the people that fall in the just into six figures space. You're paying a 62% marginal tax rate at that level, versus, as Jill said, 2% for the next couple of years and only 3 or 4% for the year after. It's an enormous saving. And from a company's point of view, you don't pay national insurance either. So there's another almost 14% saving. So when we talk to CFOs and finance directors, there's a huge, on top of the benefits to air quality, to retention, which I think the retention of staff is a really big issue. I run several businesses, and retaining and motivating staff is a huge issue. In the UK at the moment, how do we keep staff? How do we keep them motivated? So as a competitive employment tool, as well as it being very financially advantageous, it's as close to being the proverbial no-brainer as I've come across.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And then staying with yourself, Chris, which businesses would you say are the easiest to consider electrifying the fleet, and they're the best suited and utilising the tech to its maximum capacity?
Well, interestingly, so what we found, there's a load of companies that wouldn't usually have a company car fleet that all of a sudden this makes sense for. So I'm thinking of accountants and lawyers and professional services. Those sorts of organizations traditionally haven't run company car schemes for probably 20-25 years. So as you can tell from my slightly greying hair, and I have to notice that my picture on that was my headshot is clearly getting old now. But when I first started working in the early 90s, the company car was the thing to have. And the way to make it cheap was to do thousands and thousands of miles, business miles. but it very much went out of vogue. It became very expensive, and really very few companies provided company cars unless it was really necessary because tax rates are so high. That's completely turned on its head now. So I think what's the interesting thing now are companies that have never considered it before, and I suspect Jill has a very similar kind of experience from her business, are now looking at company cars. What they need, however, is organisations like ours who can help them manage it, because what they don't want to do is have to start employing fleet managers. Again, you go back to the 80s and 90s, most, even small businesses would have had a fleet manager to manage all these company cars. By and large, that role's disappeared. And actually adding that back in is quite painful. Why would you want to bring yet more admin into a business? So I think most of the kind of larger EV leasing and EV businesses will carry that workload for the companies. So I think there's really no barriers now for companies that would never have considered it before. Companies have already got large fleets that have already got the infrastructure in place. They're different, but I think that's where it's really interesting for companies that would never have considered it. Particularly if you've got a team of companies where you've got some higher rate taxpayers, because that becomes really, really compelling. That's really where I think the sweet spot is at the moment.
Brilliant. And Dave, is there anything that you would like to add on the back of Chris's comment?
Yeah. One of the experiences that we've come across with one of the businesses that we've helped, when we asked them, why did he want charge points installed there? One of the main reasons was they were going for a council tender, and they had to stipulate what their green credentials were. So that was something that I hadn't thought about before. So there seems to be a lot of businesses who are obviously looking after the staff and looking after the community, but they're also doing it for potential tenders and winning contracts as well, which is quite an interesting tack now. I don't know if it's every council or every tender, but there seems to be a number of them now which are saying, making them have a really in-house look at how they're doing things linked to the environment, and obviously making the fleet electric is one of the ways that it can be greener.
ESG is definitely becoming a key factor that we've witnessed as tendering, councils in particular really pushing on ESG. And then just staying with yourself, Dave, as well, so moving into like the pre-installation type questions and that due diligence that a business should have in place when it comes to picking a preferred installer. So what should a company in particular look for in an installer? Is there any particular accreditations or standards that signify like a go-to or a trust mark type thing?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think we all probably know the benchmark of the NEC sticker. You'll see that on all your electrical certifications. I think if you are looking for an approved installer, that's the first place to look. And then each charge point does have its own potential list of installers which are accredited by them. Now, depending on the charge point that you select, that's either just an online quick yes or no question, or it's a more in-depth 2-3 day course. So just be mindful of that when you're trying to choose an approved list of installers based on the charge point. I think the best thing, and I do it for everything, whether or not I'm going out for a meal or going on holiday, is look on Google, look at the reviews, look what people have said, and that is often a good way of going about things, but certainly making sure that they're an approved NEC IEC contractor.
Super. And if Paul has been able to join us, I'll just open it up to Paul as well.
Hi Ash, hi everybody. Thank you for having me. Sorry I was late and unable to speak at first. Just brief introduction. I'm the chief exec and founder of Totally Charged EV, who are an installer and operator of public and fleet charging points and a renewable energy investor. And we have another company called Panda Cloud EV, which is a back office software platform for businesses. And I agree with everything that's been said by the panel today, particularly Dave's comments. Google is your friend. Check out your who you're looking at having as an installer. The internet's a wonderful resource to look at, and if you do your homework, you'll find someone that's good. There's lots and lots of good installers out there.
Super. And just staying with yourself, Paul, for the next area is touching on the different business models that are available. What's the kind of thing that yourselves offer, or you've seen across the board as well?
Well, we are a business which specialises in fully funded solutions. So we'll often go in and work with a business in a workplace setting, or an investor retail setting, or a hotel, or some place where there's parking and dwell time, and we will invest in the charging equipment. We'll put the most suitable charging equipment with the right charging speed for that particular location, and we will partner with a property owner. Could be a pub, could be a hotel, could be a hospital, and we will take away all the capex costs, risk and hassle of having EV in public settings or workplace settings. That's our model. We see lots of people, though, particularly in workplace, saying that's great, but we'd like to fund it ourselves. And we see that a lot, and that's a different model, and that's where you have installers who will come along, and if you pay for it, they'll do whatever you want and advise you on the charging speeds that are appropriate for your particular setting. Our back office software then comes into play, Panda Cloud, because if you're a business and you want to help your staff go towards a transition to sort of net zero, and you want to provide the facilities in the workplace, you don't, as a business owner, necessarily want to be giving the free electricity on free vend. So if you have our software product, you can effectively set tariffs and manage your charging point network within your business setting, and recoup the cost of the electricity in a number of different ways. So those are our two models, and there's several iterations on the theme also.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And Chris, is there anything that you would like to add on the back of that as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to pick on Paul's point that when businesses are looking to implement, and whether they use the charge point operator model or whether they own the capital themselves, particularly when you've got a mixture of customers, suppliers, staff, different types of staff, is coming up with a strategy and a policy for who pays what for what charging and what speeds those chargers are. It's very easy to look at, well, what's the cheapest unit I can put in? But actually, and I think this is what Paul was making, getting the appropriate sized technology and the appropriate type of technology installed is really important, because otherwise you could end up with a whole load of largely useless bits of kit that don't fit the needs of the actual business. And I think some of the difficult discussions are non-technical, they're more policy and strategic. You know, are we going to charge different rates for different members of staff? What about if is salary sacrifice different to a company car, is different again to a company van, and all those discussions? And how do we make sure we don't end up turning something that should be a big positive into a major negative? Car parking is generally, I think, a real big issue for most businesses and highly politicized. Charging just ups the ante on that. So putting lots of thought and talking to whoever's doing the charge point installation for you, just to make sure you've thought through those implications and got the right kit, the right charging. Yeah, is it all free to air or is it chargeable? And if so, who's going to pay what? How's that going to work? Because you can very quickly create a huge amount of admin behind the scenes. So software like Paul's Panda is really important, because you need something to manage. Otherwise, you're creating a huge amount of admin overhead that you don't have today.
Super, thank you. And then, yeah, just following on from that as well, obviously we briefly touched on the types of charges, and Jill, charges in terms of a commercial setting obviously completely vary when it comes to home charging. So is there anything that you would request or limitations when it's come to home charging and workplace charging?
Yeah, I think it's just really when we're talking about workplace charging, is, you know, and introducing electric vehicles into a fleet, or, you know, as company cars or indeed salary sacrifice schemes, you know, depending on the business, depending on the you know, the employees and so on, lots of people will end up doing some charging, or maybe even a lot of charging at home. Especially if for those people who have access to off-street parking. And you know, if I can just give a very personal example, so I've been home charging now for over 5 years. I do, you know, I don't know, 95% of all my charging at home overnight when I'm asleep. So it takes me 10 seconds to plug in. Dead simple. I have it set so that I only charge during off-peak hours. So I'm on an EV friendly off-peak energy tariff, which is 7.5 pence per kilowatt hour. So essentially that is so cheap. And it costs me less than £5 to fully charge my Kia e-Niro. And that gives me real world range of 280 miles. And I was speaking to a friend, you know, at the weekend, and they filled their people carrier up with diesel for 500 miles, and that cost £107. You know, and I get 280 miles for less than £5. You know, which is just crazy cheap. And you know, and the convenience of charging at home, I don't think can be underestimated either. Of course, lots of people don't have access to off-street parking. I think it's about 40% of households in the UK. So there is that added challenge. However, I think the good news on that is that we are seeing increasing numbers of on-street chargers. We're also seeing some really neat, for example, gully charging solutions emerging. So this is where, so if you live in a terrace, you can have a gully put through the pavement, so you can then lay your own charging cable. So not only is that, you know, you're going to be able to charge outside your house. Granted, you don't own the space outside your house, so that's another bit of an issue. But people do overcome that, and it does work for them. But the beauty of that is that you are also not paying the extra VAT that you have to pay when you're charging out and about using public charging infrastructure.
Brilliant. Yeah, and moving into the next topic as well, and obviously I imagine this is going to be an interesting discussion, is overcoming those common misconceptions such as range anxiety. You see Jill is excited for this one, and charge time. So yeah, so Jill, we go back to you to kick this one off.
Yeah, of course. Yes, yeah. So just touching on range anxiety, I think these days, I think probably it's becoming a thing of the past. Because the most electric cars these days will happily run for 250 miles plus on a single charge. And if we think that 99% of all journeys in the UK are under 100 miles, I think the average daily mileage is under 30 miles at least. So for most people, most of the time, then you're not actually even going to have to stop and charge en route. And for those longer journeys, you know, you can plan ahead a little bit. I'd always recommend having, you know, your first choice charger, and then have a plan B up your sleeve as well, just in case it doesn't work, just in case there is a queue, you know, or something else goes wrong. And very often, you know, going a little bit off the beaten track to find a charger, you know, in a pub, for example, you know, it can be a really great option. But I think also in terms of public charging, you know, we hear a lot in the media, oh, we're not going to have enough public chargers. There are not enough public chargers. They don't work. All this doom and gloom. But actually, and I think, as you said at the start, Ashley, you know, there are almost 50,000 public chargers. The charge point operators have now committed £6 billion to improving and extending the, you know, in terms of numbers, the public charging infrastructure in the UK in the next few years. So it is getting better all the time. But the really important thing is that it's the right type of charger, so the right speed, in the right place, in the right numbers, that they work, that it's easy to pay. So now, you know, most chargers will have to be contactless payment. So it's just making it easier for the driver to use. And I think, you know, and then charge times as well, you know, I think on average to go from about 20% to 80% probably takes about 40 minutes, depends on the car, depends on the charging speed, but it's that kind of thing. And so it's very often just the time it takes, if you need to stop en route, time it takes to have a comfort break, grab a coffee, something to eat, and then you're on your way again. There's always lots of challenges around batteries as well that I could talk to. But, you know, in terms of battery life and whether you are going to have to replace, you know, fork out quite a lot of money to replace your electric car battery, the latest data from Tesla, which is really, really interesting, because now, you know, the longer time goes on, the more data we are amassing on this kind of thing. Tesla is now showing that at 200,000 miles, then there is only 13% battery degradation. So you're essentially, even after 200,000 miles, you've still got almost 90% battery capacity. So actually, really, the facts are emerging that electric car batteries are likely to outlast any internal combustion engine.
Brilliant, thank you.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I'm just moving into the installation stage. So I'll direct these more so at Paul and Dave. So in terms of the process of installing an EV charger in the workplace and at home, what's the typical process? What's the type of things that a purchaser should be aware of? So if I come to Dave first on this.
Yeah, I'll just touch on the residential ones. Obviously, like we said, if there's you know, off-road parking, it's great. We just make sure that the DNO is happy with the load that's coming in. If it is an on-street solution, which has been alluded to previously, then there are products out there which we're trying to get pushed more and more, but it does vary from council to council what's accepted. So the gully system is great, and one council might accept it, but another council next door might not. And then what we've actually seen again is a variation actually within a council territory, that one street's allowed a gully and then another street isn't. So I would always double check first if it's an off-street solution with the council, with the local authority, that they're happy to proceed. But yeah, I think a lot of it does come down to having that hands-on site survey first and foremost.
Yeah.
A lot of companies might just do it on a Google Maps or take instruction over the phone. We recommend that you go to site, have a site survey, speak to the client, speak to them about what their preconceptions are, what they wanted, and then talk them through what the actual other solutions are and give them the best advice really for the solution which they're after. And then obviously when you're looking at a commercial install, there's lots of other things you've got to take into consideration in terms of who actually owns the land. That's one thing that we've always will double check on first. We will do a title check to ensure that the actual person who is making the decision, who's saying, yeah, chuck a point in there, actually has the legal right to do so. And then we do, obviously, the relationship with the DNO, the site surveys again. We point them in the right direction of potential grants, so the WCS grants per charger and the infrastructure grants as well, so they can obtain vouchers to assist with the purchase of these charge points. So it's very much a hand-holding type approach, which we think is great because this is new tech for a lot of people. A lot of companies are touching this for the first time. A lot of people are moving into this for the first time. So they need a hell of a lot of support, which I'm sure Paul has come across as well with his company.
Yeah, a nice segue there, Dave, as well. Thank you very much. Yeah, so Paul, yeah, just following on from what Dave was saying, and then if you could touch on like the typical level of disruption you would usually expect when it comes to the install side of things.
Sure. I think, Dave, you missed your calling. You should be a radio DJ after that.
Yeah, I've got a face for radio, Paul. But yeah.
Same here. Echo everything Dave says. We don't do anything in the residential space. It's all commercial locations. But putting together the solution in the way that Dave's more eloquently than me described is exactly what we would say too. Level of disruption it depends on location. So for example, we've surveyed and done proposals on a number of different types of locations just this week, and I'll pick on 2 or 3 which happen to be hotels in one in the northwest to elsewhere in the country, and it varies greatly because in one of those locations there's something for specifics related to the owner. Dave's point about the ownership, specific requirements of the owner and the way the car park's configured. There's something like 100-meter run of civils that's required, so a trench and then a lot of cable, and clearly that adds cost. The more you have to dig into the ground, the longer the trenches you dig, the more civils you have to do, the longer the runs of cable, the more cost is introduced. Yeah. So and with that work obviously comes greater disruption. Elsewhere, we've looked at a couple of jobs this week, as I say, where actually the solution's very simple because they can be wall mounted, they relate well to the car park and the busy parts of the car park and where our partner would like them to be. Because obviously our solutions are partnerships whereby we put the infrastructure in, we want it to be utilised as much as is possible by our EV driving customer, and our hosts also want it to be used because it's, in a hotel scenario, it's an important part of what they are offering to patrons and guests, the ability to sort of charge overnight on a leisure or business trip. And so it needs to work for both parties. And at the heart of what we try and do, we try and create solutions that are going to be used, take the hassle and risk away from our partners, and also generate revenue. So our model is premised on paying a host a certain amount of money in rent and some of the upside as well through some net profit share. And obviously we're only able to do that if they're put in the right place. Disruption, again, just to come back to that, it varies, but there aren't many jobs where you're putting some charges in, because we're at the early stages of all this. I think one of the other speakers talked about the relative numbers of EVs on the road are still very, very low. You look across at Scandinavia and elsewhere in mainland Europe, they're quite a bit further ahead than us. We're very much at the beginning. But if you're talking about a first phase of workplace charges or charges elsewhere, 4, 6, 8, your disruption is going to be less than a week, we would say. Dave, don't know whether you would agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. The civils, obviously, digging up a road is going to cause a little bit of a disruption. But if you've got a good company that you can maybe subcontract, or you've got civils in-house, which a lot of companies do now, then yeah, you're looking at a week to 10 days max, I would suggest, yeah.
And then in terms of the maintenance cost of, so if we touch on the maintenance charges of all the cost for the fleet, and then touch on the charges. So Chris, I'll direct more of the fleet costs maintenance to yourself, if that's okay. If you'd just like to touch on those sort of figures. Well,
yeah, I mean, so the reality is all of this technology needs looking after. I think people that expect just to install it and forget about it, there's probably, again, I'm not an expert, the guys know more about the sort of technology around the installs. If I look at the broader EV fleet, I've seen various different stories. So at a personal one, I convinced my 75-year-old mother to buy an Ioniq 5 Hyundai, which she's thrilled with. She's the coolest granny in the playground when she picks my nephews up. She had her first service last week. She was here this week and told me about it, and paid £80 for a 12,000-mile first-year service, which I can't think of another vehicle that would go in for the first-year 12-mile service if it wasn't electric that would be so low. And I think so in terms of the running costs for electric vehicles generally, they should be much lower. I mean, the reality is the cars are generally heavier, so they will chew through more tyres. That, again, depends on how they're driven. One of the things I would suggest is electric cars are generally a lot quicker off the start because of the nature of electric vehicles getting maximum torque from the start. So there is a risk if you're very heavy with your right foot that you'll chew through more tyres. But everything else, really, there's very little. There are no or far fewer lubrication issues. So you don't have engine oils, you don't have gearbox oils in the same way. So there's a lot less to service. So actually moving forward, and I completely agree with the point made earlier by Jill, which is the the actual fear around battery life and the need to replace batteries after 3 years and that kind of stuff, that's not being borne out in the field based on all the evidence we've got now. I think inevitably, if you were to charge a car overnight on a domestic 7 kilowatt type feed versus charging it every day on a 250 kilowatt DC charge, I can't believe it won't last longer with a slower, steadier charge. That's just physics. But very few people are using exclusively super fast chargers every day. They're much more likely to be using overnight charging that's a slower rate. So I think moving forward, the cost, the management maintenance costs of electric vehicles will prove to be much lower. I know I've got some friends who run car dealerships. They're very nervous moving forward that they get a big revenue stream out of maintenance and management of Audis and BMWs and what have you. And they're all looking at a potential significant drop in their incomes moving forward and how that will change their business model. So I think that's one of the adjustments we'll see moving forward, which has got to be a positive thing. Yeah. The only other cost, we touched on it before we came on air, which is there are bigger insurance costs today around electric vehicles, and I don't think we should hide away from that. That's for two reasons. I think one is the cars are generally more expensive than their petrol equivalents. Obviously, that's changing over time. But the second thing is the repair costs tend to be higher because at the moment, insurance companies seem much more willing to write cars off for damages that would normally be repaired on a petrol and diesel car. Now, again, we were speaking earlier, there are moves afoot within the industry to tackle that issue. And I think we have to recognise we are still in the early stages of development. And as more and more vehicles hit the street, more and more second-hand cars, more evidence of what the real costs of running them are, more independent maintainers look at doing maintenance, and there are more facilities available. The costs, I think, will only fall. There's only one way they're going to happen as the volumes increase. Even with all those additional costs, the actual cost of running an electric car are hugely lower than the equivalent petrol and diesel, however you measure it. So it's pretty much all good news.
Super. Yeah, and just following on from that as well, obviously we briefly touched on the monetary benefits, salary sacrifice. So to Jill, talking about policy support and grants, if you would like to just cover more about the benefit in kind, salary sacrifice. I know we mentioned it earlier on in the discussion, but yeah, those additional benefits, and then I'll throw it back to the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate some of the points around EV salary sacrifice, so employees can save up to 40% on the cost of a kind of a normal lease, if you like. It does depend on what tax band you are on. And, I think if you are a medium to large size company, my understanding that is that under the Companies Act, then you have to report on an annual basis on your kind of sustainability credentials and so on. So by implementing a salary sacrifice scheme for electric cars, then you are ticking a big box in that regard as well. And then I just wanted to, I spotted a really, really nice case study actually the other day that I just wanted to highlight. So not necessarily salary sacrifice, but certainly in terms of transitioning fleet to electric. There's a company that slashed more than £2 million a year off its fleet operating costs by transitioning to electric vehicles, whilst reducing diesel consumption by almost 2 million litres and cutting almost 5,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions. So in one fell swoop, I'm not saying it was overnight, but you are doing, you are saving money, you are massively reducing reliance on fossil fuels, and of course you're helping the environment as well. So it's a kind of a treble win there.
Super, thank you. And just conscious of time, so the last question in my sort of section is to Paul around technology, that part as well, including the software. So yeah, Paul, if you'd like to just cap off that section for me, please.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ash. I mean, technology for us breaks down to two things. It's the hardware and equipment, and it's the software. And both technologies move at lightning pace and change almost, it feels, every week. And that can be quite dizzying sometimes for businesses that aren't involved in EV on a day-to-day. So I think our job, and probably everybody on the panel who is involved in the EV sector, is to try and demystify the tech, as the whole session is sort of labelled, really. What we find on the software side of things is we try and make our user interface, the dashboard that businesses use to manage the networks that they've created, in a way that I think one of the panelists talked about. It can create burdens moving a business fleet into the electric space. Our interface, our platform, tries to make it as simple as possible, so you're not having to employ somebody dedicated to do it. They can get the training and administer the network fairly simply. The software that we've created, that we have, our product, is also really smart in the way it helps diagnose faults with the hardware, and how it codifies mistake errors and diagnoses issues with hardware. So that's a way of making sure that once you've got your chargers, whether it's stuff that we do in the public domain or stuff that's in a workplace setting, you want it to function, you want it to work, you don't want downtime, because that's going to impact your business or impact your employees and how they go about doing their daily routines. So for us, software has to relate to the hardware. There's some great hardware out there. We don't manufacture anything, but we are hardware agnostic, so we look at what the best products are on the marketplace. I have to say that there are some countries overseas who are many years ahead of where we are. We look at some of the products that come from China, and their EV infrastructure is 10 years ahead of us. And we were sitting down with some people last week who were showing us some stuff which is I don't think we're quite ready for in the UK yet, but it'll soon come. And I think if you can harness the best tech, businesses particularly, and embody that, then you can have a competitive advantage. And it's down to people in the sector, people like you've got on the panel, to help business get to that position.
Yeah, we'll definitely see more innovation. One thing that we're well known in the UK is we're a really innovative country. So yeah, so that in terms of my questions is done. So yeah, Tim, if you'd like to come online and pose any Q&A questions to the panelists.
Yeah, I've got I think the breadth of conversation has been really good, because there's not too many questions. So I think we've actually covered quite a lot today, which is brilliant news. But one of the questions I have here, which is from Carl, he would like to know how long it takes for a DNO to respond to requests.
Wow, they do vary. We're quite lucky. We've got quite a few good contacts across the DNOs. I really hate to sound like a politician, but it can take a week, 2 weeks, a month for some of them. Others, it can take a couple of days. Honestly, it's throw it up in the air, see where it lands. It all depends on the time of year. It all depends on the DNO. I'm sorry, I can't be more precise.
That's all good. Good answer. Got another question here. I guess this is more kind of technical and probably addressing concerns about range anxiety and planning your journeys. But does weather actually impact the effectiveness of a charger? Say if it's very heavy rain, stormy weather, is that going to impact the types of chargers you can use and how effective they are?
Do you want me to take that? No, not at all. Certainly not in our experience. The chargers we use are very robust. They're out in the rain, all weathers, day in, day out. We do see faults. You know, I'm not going to lie that there aren't times when I turn up to charge publicly and a machine is out of order, but that isn't typically down to weather. It's usually down to other things. And I think I'm an EV driver, and I do long journeys. So I don't, although I charge at home, to Jill's point, I do a lot of public charging because I'm up and down the motorway on a daily basis. The other myth that I think is significantly over exaggerated is about car batteries, and certainly the technology within the vehicle is getting better and better. So my range is about 250 miles. If I have the heating on for a prolonged period, yeah, it will bring that down, but it is not particularly affected by cold weather or warm weather other than using stuff in the car. So this idea that a cold day can suddenly wipe 100 miles off your range is not a personal experience of mine.
Can I jump in there as well? I'd just like to echo what Paula said there, actually. I think we tend to hear a lot in the media about the range and how it plummets in winter. You know, my experience, again, is that, you know, the real world range of my car is 280 miles. I think it drops to about 250, 255 in really, really cold weather for a few days a year. It's absolutely no big deal at all. But in the summer, when it's hot, my range increases. So I've got over 300 miles on a single charge in the hot weather. And that's something that you don't hear about.
Did anyone else want to jump in with that question, or shall we move on to the next one? No, all good. Okay, we've got a question here from Katrina surrounding HGVs, kind of bigger vehicles that are going to be carrying quite heavy loads, possibly over longer distances. I suppose, what kind of considerations should an organisation be making if they're operating a fleet of vehicles that are doing long journeys, carrying lots of heavy goods, and potentially going to use more fuel, etc.? How would you address that?
Is that one for me to pick up as on the basis that I sell diesel to large hauliers as well? So the reality is today there is very limited option for electric vehicles above cars. So there are a handful of hybrids available for vans and larger kind of weight. The challenge we've got is largely payload. So if we look at the classic transit kind of builder's van, because of the weight limitations of a 3.5 ton truck, there's only so much you can put on in terms of batteries and then load. One of the options is the government has been asked, I know, by industry to up the axle weights of these vehicles, which will allow us to basically carry what we carry now, but the batteries as well. That's still in discussion with the Department of Transport. I think again, I'm heavily involved in the kind of heavy haulage. I run a fleet of 50 or 60 HGVs. Today, there are really only two options. One is you run them on diesel, two is you run them on a HVO type fuel, which is a waste oil replacement, which takes about 90% of the emissions away. It's more expensive and therefore only really relevant to certain areas. Moving forward, there's a debate, which is basically, do we go electrification? And there's numerous ways of doing that, or do we go down the hydrogen route? And anyone that's spent any time on Twitter will see the raging debate that goes on about the use of hydrogen in haulage. The truth is nobody knows. It depends upon how industry decides to make hydrogen, where various government policies go. But today, there's very limited options for the heavy end with batteries, just because of physics. I'm also an EV driver. I have 3 in the family. I've been using hybrids and EVs for the last 5 or 6 years. And I can tell you that for everyday usage, there are very few people for whom electric vehicles can't make sense. It is a mindset change, though, and that's the point I think the panel will have made. My petrol cars never filled themselves up by magic overnight. My electric car does. But you do have to plan more when you do longer journeys, and I think that's something that just means a little bit more thought. But for the heavy stuff, the jury's still out. I think we're some years away. I know that Tesla have kind of profiled their semi, as they call it in the US. There are heavy goods vehicles available today. So I was at a show last year. We looked at a 6-wheel truck, which is a 32 tonner. The price of a 32 ton oil truck, which is what we run, is about 200,000. The battery equivalent's about 450,000. So capital wise, a lot more expensive, but they are cheaper to run. because they're using electric rather than diesel. But the payback periods are quite long, and they're definitely being used by more and more bin lorries. I think Nottingham have invested quite a lot in it, but it's a very difficult thing to financially justify at the moment. But I think that the jury's still out, and we'll need to see if the technology can improve, weights can come down, before we ever see it in the heavy end of the marketplace.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate your point there as well about a lot of EVs and fleet transitions being about kind of attitude changes and adjustments within businesses.
Yeah.
So I guess my question here would be, say, for example, you're a director of a company and you have a fleet of vehicles and you would like to electrify them. What kind of things would you do to encourage your staff who may be at first a bit resilient to electrifying and taking up an EV? Do you have any tips for that?
Well, I think, honestly, based on my own experience, there is no shortage of interest from staff. We opened up a salary sacrifice scheme internally, and it was much. I expected there to be interest by some of the more highly paid staff, some of the directors, but actually we had loads of people. We have at least 3 Funky Cats, which is a Chinese electric car, and I think the staff member are paying about £150 a month, all inclusive, for her car, and she absolutely loves it. I've just come back from a trip to South Korea and China to do some fact finding while I was over there, and I'll concur with Paul's comment that the number of the new tech that's coming over from the Far East and Southeast Asia is mind blowing. Not just in EVs and charging points, but heat pumps and everything. You know, energy. So I've been involved in energy for the last 12, 13 years, and before that I was in the technology industry. And the technology industry changed at an unbelievable pace, but energy pretty much has been doing what it's been doing for the last 50 years with very little change and innovation. That's all changing now. So a lot of the technologies that you're seeing today will be overtaken by stuff in the next 6 months. Feed, speed, stabilities, all that kind of stuff. So it's a really exciting time. We have challenges that the old part of the energy industry, the DNOs, the networks, are struggling to keep up, frankly. But the companies that you see represented around this table are all very much at the sharp end. We're the ones that are getting our heads around this fast-moving technology, and I think it's really exciting. I think it's a huge change for businesses, but I don't think you'll see a lack of interest in staff, honestly, based on my experience. I think it's a bigger challenge is getting the business owners to open their minds to the opportunities. That's a bigger challenge. Getting FDs to look at it, getting chief execs to look at it. Once they do, their staff are largely on board because of the financial benefits and the ease of use.
Good, thank you. I've got a question here from James. He wants to know if is quoting a reduction in fossil fuel usage by switching to EVs, is that a false assumption, as you still need to generate your electricity from somewhere, and if that's still predominantly being produced by fossil fuels, is this an issue? So I guess what James would like to know is, are there ways that you can ensure you're kind of charging your fleet from sustainable sources? Are there green technologies you could partner your charge points with in order to ensure that you're making the most sustainable choices possible and genuinely reducing your reliance on fossil fuels? If anyone would like to take that one.
Yeah, I'll say a few words on that, and then somebody else can hop in if they want to. So a lot of the recent work that has been done on sort of whole life cycle analysis of battery electric vehicles versus petrol and diesel equivalent is showing that certainly for the EU and the UK in terms of the electricity mix, then battery electric vehicles are, I think it's almost 3 times cleaner, sort of no matter how they are charged. So in terms of the grid mix, so that's one thing. And I do believe that there are calculators out there as well where you can kind of refine that and look at that in more detail.
Yeah, you can also use green energy providers, and there are some products that are solar compatible as well. So that's also carrying a little bit of the weight.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's very true. So we generally provide solar and batteries on top of the electric cars and the charge points we put in. And I think that, again, is part of the mindset of understanding this is a much bigger discussion than just having a fleet of electric cars with somewhere to plug them in. I think the other factor is that the grid at the moment generates about 50% of the electricity that's generated on the grid is fossil derived, and that clearly changes at different times of the year. The government has stated that by 2035 it wants that grid to be in essence carbon neutral. So you should see a reduction. I think Labour's policy was to pull that forward to 2030, which frankly technically looks a real challenge because of lots of long-term planning issues. But also bear in mind that a fossil fuel internal combustion engine at best operates around 80% efficiency, whereas you get 100% efficiency out of electric engines. So yeah, you are going to make a significant reduction in your fossil fuels, regardless of how it's used, even if you're using the grid to charge it up, which most people are.
I'm still aware of time, but there's one more quick question to ask, and it's from Terry. He would just like to know if anyone could signpost for him any research surrounding battery life and on EVs, because he's seen a lot of research that it's around 5 years. He'd just want to find some to understand it a bit further.
Yes, so on that one, Terry, then if you look up Dr. Ewan McTurk, he is one of the UK's leading battery electrochemists, and he runs a YouTube channel called Plug Life Television, but he has a wealth of information on battery life and so on. So that's Ewan McTurk. He is the go-to on all things to do with electric car batteries.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for those answers. I think that concludes the Q&A. So back to you, Ash.
Super. Thanks for that, Tim. Yeah, so as we mentioned at the beginning, we have an online marketplace where you can search the marketplace for providers of EV technology. So Green Arc, EVC, and Totally Charged, they're all members on our marketplace. You can search by area. You can even narrow the search down for accreditation. So as Dave and Paul have mentioned, having those trust marks, those accreditations are really important when you're looking for a particular installer. So I highly recommend using our marketplace. Our next webinar is around carbon offsetting, so that's on the 14th of November. And the event link for that is on our Green Economy website. And finally, for myself, if you do need any additional support or advice, we have our online net zero toolkits and guidance. There's going to be additional EV guides as well. So again, there's the URL for those resources. And if you do require any more information, you can contact myself or any member of the team. Yeah, and finally, I just want to thank our fantastic panelists. It's been a great discussion, and thank you to everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Ash.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.